If you're enjoying our content, please consider going to our Patreon and becoming a supporter. There are different tiers to select from, and we thank you for your support. For an equipment reference, I am watching all of my movies either on my dedicated 4K Blu-ray player in my bedroom on a 55-inch Samsung 8000 series 4K TV, and in my rec room on the Xbox One S Blu-ray player, watching those on a 65-inch Samsung 8000 series 4K TV. Just to let you know how I'm watching these movies.
For me, it was Tuesday.
Well, hello there. Welcome to another episode of For Me, It Was Tuesday. Come closer, you won't get hurt. Today we're going to be dealing with, obviously by the way I am appearing today, we're going to be dealing with Star Wars, the Skywalker Saga. But not just the Rise of Skywalker release that came out on March 31st. We're going to be dealing with the Best Buy exclusive Star Wars The Skywalker Saga Blu-ray set. 4K HD, also comes with the regular Blu-rays and digital copies. So this thing comes in this very, very cool container right here. Obviously the discs are inside this silver booklet. That's one drawback to it, is the booklet, so I'm going to have to definitely say that right off the bat. I do not like when they put discs, because they've done the same with the original Star Wars saga they came out with, I want to say almost 10 years ago. They did it with the Indiana Jones Complete Adventures. I do not like when they put them in these little booklets where you have to kind of very, very delicately dig out the disc, because you're always going to get fingerprints on the edges, and I do hate that. I wish they would change that. But we're going to review the entire set in order of original release. So we're going to start with the original trilogy. We're going to look at Star Wars A New Hope, Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back, and of course Star Wars Return of the Jedi. Now, starting off with A New Hope, originally released back in 1977, starring Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford, Carrie Fisher, Peter Mayhew as Chewbacca, Anthony Daniels as C-3PO, David Prowse as Darth Vader, who is basically in the costume Darth Vader, and of course James Earl Jones giving his amazing voice to Darth Vader, and also Peter Cushing as Grand Moff Tarkin. So the original Star Wars film was revolutionary. It pioneered a lot of the practical effects that you see in films, that you saw in films of that genre for decades after that film came out. George Lucas and his amazing team put together just some amazing visual effects that the likes of which had never been seen. And unfortunately, George Lucas, the pioneer that he is, likes to tinker with his films. And yes, this Blu-ray set does give you the, I want to say, Disney Plus 4K versions, because yes, these were released on Disney Plus in 4K, but you know me, I wanted it physical, and they did deliver. But it is unfortunately the McClunky version where Han and Greedo shoot at each other instead of Han firing, and that being the end of the story. So as great as these films do look, and there are some amazing, amazing 4K visuals here, they still are not giving you the definitive original versions of these films. The only way, well, not the only way, but one of the most recent releases of the original untouched, I want to say specialized edition is the DVD release that they came out with, I want to say back when Phantom Menace and all of those films were being released on DVD. They re-released this original trilogy on DVD. It came with the special edition and also a bonus disc with the original untouched versions of the film. And I do have that. I understand they're probably pretty hard to get a hold of, or if you do find them, they're going to go for fairly high price on eBay, especially every time they re-release Star Wars. People do always want to go back and revisit those original untouched versions. But going back to A New Hope, one of the drawbacks that you get anytime a film, an older film especially, is brought up to a 4K visual or a 4K version, is you run the risk of the effects, of course, not holding up over time, the crispness of the visual betraying the visual effects that were done. And of course, with a film like Star Wars, you had these massive environments that were pretty much done with insanely good, especially at the time, matte painting, trickery, essentially visual trickery. The Millennium Falcon in some instances was just a ramp, but the rest of the entire Millennium Falcon was, of course, a matte painting. With the visuals being in 4K resolution now, it's so sharp that it stands out, and it stands out pretty bad on some of them. I want to say Empire Strikes Back has got a very, very good example of this early on in the film on Hoth. During the Hoth section of the film, they have a moment where two of the rebel soldiers are just kind of standing around. Huge matte painting in the back. That in the background, that's, you know, obviously the background. In the original film, looking at it, DVD, even the Blu-ray, of course, you know, when you brought it to Blu-ray resolution, you noticed it, but it wasn't as, it just didn't stand out as much as it does now in 4K. And if you can kind of get used to it, look past it, you're going to enjoy the films as much as you've always enjoyed them. It's just, that was one thing that kind of was a little bit jarring, seeing it in this high 4K resolution as, you know, Ultra HD for the first time. So that was one thing that did bother me just a little bit. But as far as what you get with the package, each film, for episodes 4 through 6, each film comes with 3 discs. So you get your Ultra HD disc, 4K of course. You get your Blu-ray, which houses, of course, you know, the Blu-ray version of the film. And then you get a bonus disc, and each bonus disc is packed. It's not like they skimped out and just gave you a little bit of, you know, some behind the scenes stuff. I mean, we're talking deleted scenes, we're talking, you know, bonus features, we're talking going back into archive footage and finding old interviews or screen tests and various things. So they have made sure that even if you've purchased this before, like I have done, I own the Laserdisc version of the film, I own the DVD version of the film, VHS version of the film, or Steelbook Blu-rays, the original, like I said, Saga Blu-ray set that came in the booklet. So I own basically almost every version of Star Wars that they've released, and I still got new material in this set. So I mean, it's definitely a plus to see that. So moving forward into some of the other films, Empire Strikes Back is still, to this day, one of my favorites. There is a lot going on in that film, just from an emotional standpoint, from a storytelling standpoint, from a technical standpoint as far as filmmaking goes. The asteroid field is still, bar none, one of the best flying sequences in a sci-fi film that I've seen. Every single time I watch that, I'm just amazed by what they were able to do. The camera moves, the miniatures, the modeling, just everything in that particular sequence was just amazing. And to me, that is when they really truly defined the Han Solo character, because they, you know, they always talk about, well, Han is, you know, a great pilot and all this other stuff. Okay, that's great. In the first film, A New Hope, he says, I know a few maneuvers, and it continues to fly in a straight line or off to the left a little bit. No, this time we got to see, yeah, he knows some maneuvers. The dude is good. So that was one of the things I've always enjoyed watching, and seeing it again in 4K. Yes, some of the effects, you know, they're dated. They stand out a little bit, but just seeing it again with that high quality resolution, just, it's almost like watching it for the first time again. And I did, you know, enjoy it even more. Of course, the clash with Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker for the first time. That has always been one of my favorite scenes to watch. And in 4K, it looks amazing. Return of the Jedi. Again, another very fun film. Tons and tons of action. Didn't really like the Ewoks, never liked the Ewoks, but they are there. That they're part of the story. It is what it is. I'm not gonna, you know, take anything away from that. I do, of course, wish they would go back to the original song that was sung at the end of the original release of Return of the Jedi, and not the modified, changed up song that they put in during the special editions. And also the nice Snoodles song, Cy Snoodles, her name is so weird, from Jabba's Palace. I don't like that almost music video-like song that they put into the, or sequence that they put into the film. But again, they're not my films. They're it's Lucas's films. He can do, you know, he can do what he wants to do with them, and he has done what he wanted to do with them. So that's essentially my take on the original trilogy. And for a film, like I said, with, you know, with A New Hope and even Empire Strikes Back, we're talking about films that are over 40 years and also 40 years old. That's crazy that, you know, we're still in love with these films to this point now, and to see them, you know, brought up to the 4K resolution is just, it's amazing. Yes, it does have some little visual hiccups and visual drawbacks, but it is amazing. And I definitely have to respect everything that they've done with these films, and the 4K transfer on those older films is outstanding. Now, of course, moving on in order of release, we have the prequel trilogy. Of course, the prequel trilogy is a little bit divisive. It's a little bit, well, not as divisive now, because obviously you got the sequel trilogy that people are hating on in various ways, or getting behind in various ways. But you moved on to the prequel trilogy with Star Wars The Phantom Menace, Star Wars Attack of the Clones, and of course Star Wars Revenge of the Sith. We, of course, were introduced to younger Anakin Skywalker, and we're told that he is now the crux of the entire franchise. And rubbed some people the wrong way. Jake Lloyd, of course, did play young Anakin in that film. And again, he's a young kid playing a character that is destined to become one of the most popular villains of all time. So the kid kind of got a rough break in the sense that you have an enormous amount of weight thrown on your shoulders to play a character that is that iconic in any form, at any age or any time. Darth Vader is understood to be an amazingly iconic character. So for a young kid to carry that weight, it's a little bit daunting. There's no doubt about that. And I can't really hold that against him as a kid. It's like, look, I'm a young kid, I'm interested in acting. Hey, would you like to be Darth Vader? Oh, hell yeah, definitely. I would, without a doubt, jump on that if I was in his position. He can only do what he was told to do in the films, and of course, some people liked it, some people didn't. It was what it was. Of course, we were introduced to Jar Jar Binks. Obviously, for a lot of people, that was a kind of the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of characters and just annoyance with the franchise. But Jar Jar also still represents something that was a first again. Lucas, again, being a pioneer, bringing a fully digital character to life with Jar Jar Binks. Again, love him or hate him, it was a very interesting step in filmmaking. Of course, then you also had Liam Neeson playing Qui-Gon Jinn, and Ewan McGregor playing younger Obi-Wan Kenobi. Another iconic role, a lot of weight on your shoulders to carry on that legacy of a character that is that beloved. It was really interesting to see this particular film. I remember I was very, very heavy into the Star Wars coming back, and of course this was 1999 when the first one, when The Phantom Menace was released, and we had, of course, had at that point, it had been 16 years removed from the last time a Star Wars film had been in theater. So May 1999, I remember actually standing in line, not overnight, but very, very early in the morning at a theater to get tickets. And my friends and I all went, and we were bombarded with politics and all sorts of, I don't know, just ups and downs with the film. Now granted, sitting there in the theater for the first time experiencing it, I was blown away by the visuals, the effects, the battle droids, you know, it's just the entire spectacle of the film was top notch. And of course, my favorite character in the film was Ray Park's Darth Maul. Every single time he was on screen, I was just like, you know, oh wait, jolt of attention. It's like, oh wait, gotta pay attention. What's Darth Maul about to do? I just enjoyed every moment that Darth Maul's character was on screen. Now granted, he wasn't on screen for that long in that film in terms of the movie being 2 hours and I think 15 minutes long, but every single moment he was there, it was like my eyes were glued to the screen. And of course, when you get to that final battle between Darth Maul, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Qui-Gon Jinn in the reactor on Theed, that still to this day was one of my favorite lightsaber sequences to watch and rewatch. It was just amazing, the choreography. Of course, Ray Park being a martial artist brought a high level of skill to being the first character on screen Of course, they've had other characters use the dual-bladed lightsaber in the expanded universe, but he was the first character on screen to use that particular weapon, and was just blown away by just how amazing that choreography looked, that fight, just the ferocity that he brought to the character was outstanding. Also very cool to see Ian McDiarmid come back to play Senator Palpatine at this time, not quite yet Emperor, but Senator Palpatine. And of course, he was heavy on the the political side of things, but of course also being Darth Sidious, working in the shadows the entire time. So yes, the politics part was annoying. Yes, it was like, okay, can we get back to the action? But at the same time, they're universe building at this point. Yes, we know Star Wars, but this represents the beginning of the stories that we know. So I can understand, a little bit of the exposition and some of the politics, but yet at times they got a little bit out of hand. Moving on to Attack of the Clones, yeah, Hayden Christensen. Again, you're stuck in a role where you have to play an extremely iconic character, and George Lucas was the director, so he was basically okaying all of these takes and all of the way he directed Hayden. So I mean, it is what it is. Of course, you also had Natalie Portman, great actress in her own right, playing Queen Amidala, also known as Princess Leia and Luke's mother. Of course, Darth Vader being their father, or Anakin Skywalker being their father. But their chemistry on screen was odd. Again, Hayden played, he took the direction that he played it the way he was directed, basically. Yes, there was some very odd moments. The chemistry was very strange. I love how the music cut out the moment she pulled away from his kiss. The whole speech about sand being, of course, rough and getting everywhere, and not liking sand was what it was. That's all I can really say. The late great Christopher Lee coming in to play Count Dooku was very awesome. Also, Samuel L. Jackson as Mace Windu was very, very cool. The only Jedi with a BMF lightsaber, and the only one, of course, on films to this point anyway, to carry a purple lightsaber. So that in and of itself was just very, very cool. Moving forward, Attack of the Clones had its ups and downs, but one of the things that I will always praise it for is the insane level of visuals that were done in that film. You had clone troopers that weren't, the fact that no clone trooper armor was even built, that's crazy. Just to even know that all of those clone troopers were computer generated, essentially. That whole sequence, and just to think of it, is during that large battle outside of Geonosis, when they are fighting and the clone troopers are moving in and kind of walking through the smoke and the debris and the dust, just to think that one shot is all CG, all of it, the smoke, the debris, the lasers, the troopers themselves, the vehicles and the battle droids and everything that they're going against, and just the level of just what ILM did with that is untouchable. It's bar none, just ridiculously good. And then of course you move into, after that film, and of course the great lightsaber duel between Yoda and Count Dooku. Of course, realizing Yoda as a digital character like that, moving from the puppetry to the digital character was very, very interesting. And of course, we get to see Yoda do a lightsaber fight. What more could you ask for? And we move to Revenge of the Sith, where we finally get to see the falling out with Obi-Wan and Anakin Skywalker. We finally get to see him turn to the dark side. We finally get to see him put into the suit for the first time. That film, it holds up extremely well for me. Out of all the three movies of the prequel trilogy, Revenge of the Sith is probably my favorite. I would have to say just he didn't completely embody what I would think that somebody going through that would embody as far as that turn, but again, he was directed to act that particular way, so it is what it is. But just to see that fight with them and the choreography in that particular fight, and it was, dialogue aside, the fight was amazing, and it was really very, very, very well done. And I enjoyed watching Ian McDiarmid play that little bit of devil on your shoulder type character, explaining it to him at I guess it was a space Cirque du Soleil show or whatever it was at the that one theater that they were sitting in, that the dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural. I mean, it was just awesome to see how he was taking him and twisting and just kind of perverting what the Jedi were teaching him and turning it on his head and hitting it from a different point of view. Of course, going back to that callback what Obi-Wan told Luke, that he told him the truth from a certain point of view. About, of course, his father being Darth Vader. So I like to see, it was cool to see that Ian McDiarmid's, Senator Palpatine at the time, or Chancellor Palpatine in that particular film, soon to be Emperor Palpatine, was just taking that little bit of doubt that he had and just amplifying it and twisting it and helping him essentially turn. So I did enjoy that. As far as the 4K transfer of this particular trilogy, these films, of course, 1999, you're looking back just over 20 years ago for, of course, Phantom Menace. And again, 20 years ago, those effects were top-notch. They were insane. They were, you could tell it was CG, obviously, but it looked good. 4K resolution betrays that, but at the same time, with something like that, you know what you're going to get. You're going to see some of those, that and the certain things stand out a little bit more. You can kind of the matte paintings will stand out just a little bit more than they normally would have. The effects lines, of course, are going to stand out, and it's a little bit jarring. But again, just like anything, just like if you watch a film, especially when HD first came out and when Blu-ray first came out, and higher frame rates and all that sort of thing, you notice it at first because it's jarring, but over time, I'm pretty sure you'll get used to it. And that's not really a knock on the films, that's just the resolution is that good, and of course it's always going to betray the older special effects. So of course this brings us to our final Star Wars trilogy in the Skywalker Saga. And that of course brings us to the sequel trilogy. So the sequel trilogy is probably one of the most divisive trilogies that's been released in recent filmmaking history. J.J. Abrams, of course, took the extremely hard task of doing a new Star Wars trilogy after he had already rebooted and brought very, very, very high energy to the Star Trek franchise. Looking at Force Awakens, I will give credit where credit is due. Abrams was obviously a very, very big fan of the original Star Wars films. He took great pains to make sure that he included practical effects where he could in those films, in his films rather. And I have to give him credit for what he did in Force Awakens. He did an amazing job with some of the practical effects, bringing Kylo Ren into it, of course. How do you follow up Darth Vader? It's a very, 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 very tough role to fill. I mean, you had Adam Driver doing his best in that particular role, with that particular character. Of course, you had Daisy Ridley playing Rey, John Boyega as Finn, and of course, Oscar Isaac as Poe Dameron. And some returning characters, of course. You had Chewbacca. You also had Harrison Ford returning as Han Solo, and Carrie Fisher returning as Princess Leia. So, and of course, again, Anthony Daniels as C-3PO. The guy has been in every single film, and you got to give him credit for that. I mean, he's still doing it. Looking at this particular film, there were obviously moments that I loved in this film. Kylo Ren freezing a blaster bolt in midair using the Force. Still, I mean, I remember just the collective gasp from the audience when I first saw that in theaters. That was just awesome. His lightsaber, odd as it was still, a very interesting invention, something that they were doing different. They were changing it up. And I also like the fact that his lightsaber almost had like a growl, almost like a roar to it, and just that the unstableness, and like it was angry, like it was actually an angry lightsaber. I did like that. I even liked his temper tantrums. It just showed that he was unbalanced. There was a problem with this kid, and I thought that was pretty cool. I mean, I like the fact that his character was being pulled towards the light just as much as he was, trying to give himself over to the dark side of the Force. So that particular aspect of Force Awakens I did enjoy. Obviously seeing Han and Chewie back together again, that was awesome. I really wish that the raid fight crew was used a little bit better than that one scene that they had on the scavenger ship that Han and Chewie were piloting before they got, of course, the Millennium Falcon back. Beyond that, I mean, the film itself was fun. Obviously, it was, in a lot of ways, a copy of A New Hope. And it is what it is. A New Hope is one of the best films, that has been released, period. So what better blueprint to follow? Also, Gwendolyn Christie as Captain Phasma was cool and also underutilized. Moving forward to The Last Jedi. Rian Johnson, who of course, as I talked about in my other review of Knives Out, great director with certain material. Last Jedi had its moments. It had some parts of it that were pretty interesting, pretty cool, but for the most part, Mark Hamill as Luke Skywalker in this film was kind of mishandled. And I think all parties involved would probably admit to that now, more so than what they would have said at the time. I liked where they kind of were going with the whole Rey and Kylo Ren being somehow connected in the Force, but we're not quite sure yet. I thought it was also interesting to see Snoke get killed off. A lot of people were kind of upset about that, and I look at it as the internet is the ones that built him up and hyped him up and wondered who he was and put so much into, we're gonna get answers and this is gonna be told. And realistically, they didn't promise you anything. And even if you look at almost the way the Emperor was introduced in the original films, he was shown in hologram in Empire Strikes Back. Of course, he was mentioned quite a few times in the original Star Wars film, but never seen. Then in Empire Strikes Back, you only saw him through hologram, same way you were introduced to Snoke through hologram in the first film. Didn't see him in physical form. You got the Emperor in physical form in the third film of that trilogy, of course, Return of the Jedi. And in the second film, this time around, Snoke shows up in physical form. And just like the Emperor got killed off, he got killed well, at least at that point, the Emperor got killed in Return of the Jedi during his second appearance, and Snoke got killed in his throne room in his second appearance. So they had that parallel, and at that point, they didn't explain much about the Emperor to you at all. You just knew he was the Emperor. Same thing with Snoke. Snoke is the supreme leader. Okay, we killed him. Moving on. So, I mean, I personally didn't have a problem with that because I was able to draw that parallel, but a lot of people were, oh, well, they didn't answer. They never promised you answers. So that was my take on it. I mean, people can get mad about whatever they're going to get mad about. They didn't really say they were going to explain a whole lot about him. So, now, granted, the Rey situation was a little bit different, but they resolved that, of course, when J.J. Abrams got back in the director's chair for the Rise of Skywalker. There's parts of this movie, just like I mentioned before, that I like. Pretty much everything related to lightsabers I'm always all about. I'm always very interested in and have fun with. But to see the whole dyad storyline play out with Rey and Kylo was a little bit odd, but I did like that they at least hinted that, okay, here's the reason she's so powerful in the Force. It's not just, oh, well, she's a, quote unquote Mary Sue. It is, she has a connection with another Force user, and they're kind of two sides of the same coin. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I like that they threw in, her basically being able to tap into dark side powers using Force lightning to destroy the transport she was trying to pull out of the sky, which was a very cool callback to The Force Unleashed, with you had that character, the Apprentice, pulling a Star Destroyer out of the sky. So I thought that was actually really, kind of a, little small callback to that particular lore and those, that level of Force power. I did enjoy the, I don't want to even call it necessarily final lightsaber duel, because their fight on the Death Star wreckage was fun, it was cool, but it was just more or less the emotion of her finally, striking him down, but then realizing, okay, something's not quite right, and then she heals him and leaves. Of course, runs into the original, the awesome Mark Hamill, who of course, showed up in all 3 films, in some form or another, as far as the sequel trilogy goes. He has his Yoda moment with her, basically, and even lifts his X-Wing out of the ocean there, and lets her fly off with that, which was, a very cool nod back to Yoda, essentially doing the same for Luke. So that was a cool little callback. And another thing that I will give J.J. Abrams a ton of credit on, going back to what I said first with Force Awakens, is the amount of practical effects he uses. The fact that Babu Frick, that little small puppet, was a puppet. It wasn't just a little CG guy that they threw in, and ILM just, did the effect. They actually had puppeteers do that. And they even let there was a girl that actually did his voice. She was working his mouth and everything, so she would match her performance and the mouth movements to her actual performance. So again, love the movie or hate the movie, I can never fault them for the effects work that they put in, and it is amazing. And that is, of course, with these films being released now in the 4K HD era. Now, obviously these films had been released on 4K before, with the exception, of course, Rise of Skywalker was released at the same time that the Skywalker Saga box set was released. They've already been 4K. They're already 4K transferred. They're already 4K ready. And the effects, of course, hold up under that scrutiny because it's modern, it's current, it's what's going on right now. So that any downplay I've made up of the 4K transfers for the older films is only just what you normally run into with 4K transfers of anything that's older. That higher resolution lets you see the flaws. And, like I said, I'm okay with that, with these particular films especially. Going back to Rise of Skywalker, though, I did enjoy the film. There's parts of it that, of course, slow or not quite as good. Avengers Endgame did the cavalry, returns way better than this film did, and of course Endgame came out earlier in that same year. So, sorry on that one, JJ. Like, the Russo brothers killed it on that one. As far as bringing the cavalry back to win the day. So overall, the Skywalker Saga box set is amazing. I will definitely. Now, granted, it's expensive, it's pricey. I'm gonna let you know that ahead of time. It's $250, so it's not cheap. But the amount of content, 27 discs in this thing, and some awesome artwork by Ralph McQuarrie, of course, who is the original artist for the sketches of the Star Wars saga, is what they use for the quote-unquote pages of that large booklet that's in there. And it's amazing. And then, of course, all the bonus features, all the stuff. For Rise of Skywalker, they have a Skywalker Saga documentary that is, I think it's like 2 hours and it's almost 2 hours, 10 minutes long. And it's really, really good. Like, I watched that a little bit before filming this, and man, just from start all the way to close, I mean, the amount of work, the people that were involved, it's insane how much they've put into this. And I will always respect that part of the filmmaking process, regardless of whether you like what they did with this character or this character shouldn't have done this or whatever, whatever, so what? At the end of the day, the amount of work and dedication that goes into putting these films together is something that I always will have the highest respect for.
And now, I will leave you with these final words from the Sith. For you, when George Lucas, over 40 years ago, put together a space opera that spanned decades of entertainment, for you, that was probably the greatest moment in your feeble life. But for me,
it was Tuesday.
See you next time.
Culture Junkies!